Okay, so Be'ezras Hashem, we're going to be continuing tonight with the third part of the Kislev Maamar from the Tzaddik and the Gaon Rav Yitzchak Meir Morgenstern Shlita. And we're going to be picking up where we left off with regards to the Chiddush of the Magen Avos of Kapast, that above the Darga of Ein Od, which is the Darga that Tzemach Tzedek has hinted to in the language of the Tefillah of Aleinu as Efes Zulaso, that Darga is described by the Magen Avos of Kapast, the son of the Tzemach Tzedek, as a Darga of Ki'ilu Lo Yatsa Klal, as if reality has never actually exited that divine space of plenitude, of the fullness of the infinite presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that not only is there nothing but HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but that thing that we have to point out and say there is nothing here has never even departed from the realm of the infinitude of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and as if everything was exactly the way it was prior to even the thought of creation. That was what the Magen Avos referred to as the Darga above the Darga of Ein Od. And we saw that the Rebbe brings down that this lofty darga of bittul is even higher than the level of kula kaime kiloi chashiva. The statement of the Zohar HaKadosh and the Mikubalim is that above Memale Kol Almin, which is the darga of Bina, above Soiviv Kol Almin, which is the darga of Chachma, Bina is Bittul Hayesh, the negation of selfhood. There is something to be negated. Chachma is Bittul B'Metzias. There is no longer anything to be negated. And then above that, at the level of Keser, is the Darga of Kula Kaime Kiloi Chashiva, as if everything stands in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as if it bears no significance whatsoever due to its translucent nature as an expression of the infinite. But what we see from the Magen Avos and what we see the Rebbe bringing down, which is again this darga of Efes Zulaso, which is also the secret of the Maila of the Guf, and how Tzimtzum itself teaches us that essence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so to speak, which is the understanding that we can never grasp the essence. That's a level even higher than the darga of Kula Kaima Kiloi Chashiva, as if everything stands as if it is not real. The Rebbe continues after describing that there is such a darga of realizing that really nothing ever left that original realm of infinitude, so to speak, and that there's nothing but HaKadosh Baruch Hu. At that point, the Rebbe now begins to ask his question. He says, "V'tzarich lahavin," and we have to understand, Inyan zed dahari HaKadosh Baruch Hu bara osanu al yedei machshava sabriya shasharasho gavoa ma'od. Yet how can we claim that existence never truly manifested in any existential form as something that emerges out of non-existence, out of the absolute infinitude of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as if existence never actually took place, when we know that the thought of HaKadosh Baruch Hu for creation, that machshava keduma, and that desire of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so to speak, to create the world, is rooted in the loftiest of all places. Ratza HaKadosh Baruch Hu lios ladir b'tachtonim. How can we say such a stira that really it's as if there's no existence whatsoever? V'amnan kodem machshava sabriya lo haya klum. And how can we say that there's nothing? And even though before creation there was nothing, even though before creation there was absolutely nothing, nevertheless, what we say is even though that there is this original desire and thought for the creation of the world, as we saw from the Magen Avos, that in truth, above that original thought of creation, as we're seeing, as the Rebbe sets up this stira, it's absolute nothingness. It's like it was before creation, and it's even like it was before the emergence of a thought of creation. Absolute nility, absolute nothingness, complete and utter nothingness that never departed from its absolute nothingness. And in accordance with the Magen Avos and in accordance with this higher level, this hasaga of etzem, which is really the recognition that we don't know anything whatsoever, because it's the darga of ein aruch lecha Hashem Elokeinu, that we have absolutely no erech whatsoever. That what we're learning from the Magen Avos is that even now it is as if the world has not yet been created whatsoever. And even above that, that it's above even the thought of creation, that there has been no exit. It's not only that the tzimtzum wasn't kipshuto, there was no tzimtzum. Everything is still the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu as it was prior to the thought of creation. And the Rebbe continues, after setting up this stira, how could it be that on the one hand we know the maila of creation, that ratzon fidir b'tachtonim, yet on the other hand see in the Magen Avos this idea that there's a certain hasaga which is rooted in the darga of ein aruch l'cha Hashem Elokeinu, that the Guf teaches us, specifically through katnas, specifically through tzimtzum, that we come to recognize that there's no creation whatsoever. Ubederach klal, says the Rebbe, ein oilim kol kach gavoa. Generally speaking, we do not ascend to a level of contemplation this high. Ki harei lemala mehatorah shehu bereishis bara Elokim shu machshavas abriya. Because b'derech klal, we only speak about Bereshis and forward. We only speak about what happens after the Torah emerged in the mind of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so to speak. But this darga of ki'ilu lo yatsa klal is above and beyond even the Torah itself, which is the thought of creation. Estakel ba'araisu bara alma. And generally, we don't go above that. Ulamala me machshava sabriya yeshrach metzias hapashut. Generally speaking, we don't talk about dargos there. We don't talk about levels of experience of ki'ilu lo yatsa klal. But over here we see that the Magen Avos is speaking about this darga that is even above the Torah, that is even above the original tzimtzum, which as we saw is the Torah. U'b'derech klal ka'asher medabrim al madrega shel ein od. And generally speaking, when we talk about that level of ein od, which is the recognition that there is nothing but HaKadosh Baruch Hu, generally, when we say that there is absolutely nothing other than HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and nothing exists other than HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we're talking about that level where HaKadosh Baruch Hu desired the creation of the world, which is considered the Torah in its supernal roots, umisham lahala, but not beyond that. We don't typically speak of the level of ki'ilu lo yatsa klal, to that point of complete and utter annihilation of the ego, complete and utter annihilation of the self, where I am nothing but the full expression of the infinite light in its undiluted infinite presence. Levels that obviously on the way that I'm speaking about them are megushim sheba megushim, going through thousands, millions of tzimtzumim, but to understand what the tzaddik means when he speaks these words, or to understand what the tzaddikim meant when they spoke those words or wrote those words, it's mavhil asara ayon. It causes the mind to stutter for a moment. These are ideas that can't fully be contemplated. Yet, like we said already, and we're going to continue to stress, if these ideas are to mean anything, then they mean everything. And if they mean everything, then they mean something for a person as far from these ideas as myself. And we have to understand what they mean for us as well. So here the Rebbe is stepping back on his kasha, right? The Rebbe sets up the kasha. On the one hand, we know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants creation. Baruch she'amar v'hei ha'olam. There was a machshevas abriya, there was a ratzon keduma, so to speak, to create the world. Ratz HaKadosh Baruch Hu lios lo dir b'tachtonim, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu desired to express himself in the nether realms, or all of the other expressions given over for the purpose of the creation of the world. Famously, the Arizal gives two reasons in the beginning of Eitz Chaim. The first reason, giving in the first shar of Eitz Chaim, is the idea that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has all of this potential, so to speak, and that potential can only be manifest when there is something separate and other that can be a receptacle for that expression of that potential into actuality. And the second reason, given by the Arizal in Shar HaKlalim, as made famous by the Ramchal, as well as the Tzadikim and the Talmidim of the Baal Shem Tov, is ki chok hatov lehetiv, that the ultimate capital G good has a natural tendency and expression that cannot be stopped, which is a desire to bestow good. And the only way to bestow goodness is to create receptacles that can receive this goodness. All of those reasons, about the desire to create the world that stands in stark opposition to what the Magen Avos said, which is that in truth, there was no creation of the world. We think there was creation. No, there was no creation. So the Rebbe says, really, a person can answer and say, it's no stira, because any conception of separation and any statement that we apply to the ratzon of creation of the world, or as if things were never really created, is all be'erach hatachton. All of our assumptions, all of our speculation, all of our contemplation of divinity, of yichud, is all be'erach hatachton, is all only based on our limited relation to these concepts as human beings, v'lo be'erach ha'elyon, and not with regards to the way things actually are. This is the classical distinction made by the Baal HaTanya as well as the Nefesh HaChaim of das elyon and das tachton, or yichud tata and yichud ilah. All of the distinctions that we make are mitzidenu, are from our perspective. But God forbid to apply any of these limitations to mitzido, the perspective of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That darga of mitzido, the perspective of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so to speak, we have no access to whatsoever. So the Rebbe says, even though one can settle this argument by saying, okay, everything is Berach HaTachton, all of these different levels of Ein Od and Ki'ilu Lo Yatsa Klal that we seem to see as a stira, those are only lower perspectives of human consciousness, and they bear no impact on the actual reality. That could have been an answer, but the Rebbe continues and he says, nevertheless, nevertheless, what we find is that it's still impossible to understand this in accordance with a human understanding. In accordance with human understanding, even if we want to say that everything, all of the distinctions that we're talking about are still limited within human understanding, we still can't understand the stira between the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to create the world for all of the reasons that we've discussed, and the statement, the sentiment of the Magen Avot in the Likutim, in Likut Mem Tes, that the world is as if it was never really created and that there was no creation. And so it's still a stira that needs to be settled. Because in truth, HaKadosh Baruch Hu desires the creation of the world, and the creation of the world is the entire origination and purpose of the Torah itself. And how is it possible for a person to contemplate anything beyond that place? Nevertheless, what we see is that in order to understand this stira, even though it's mitzidenu completely, we have to enter into a place that's lemal mitam v'das, that is above and beyond rational awareness, above and beyond understanding. And what we're going to see, just to bring it back to what we started with, this ability to recognize that it's all above and beyond our understanding is expressed more deeply and more poignantly and potently by the body and by katnus and by smallness and by constriction, more so than the moments of spiritual awareness and the neshama. This is all trying to show us how this idea of lamala mitam v'das, of ki'ilu lo yatsa klal, of how we can be miyashev and settle this stira between the creation of the world and the fact that the world was never actually created, that notion, which is lamala mitam v'das, above and beyond rational awareness, the ultimate recognition that we can know absolutely nothing, that is expressed in a more poignant and potent way, specifically through the body, through katnus, through the darga of matat, through that darga that the brothers tried to attack Yosef on, that darga of a love, that darga of Kel Yud Vav, which is the osios of the Tzimtzum, the Yud and the Vav, meaning that there's an attack on the secret of what Tzimtzum comes to teach us, which is that we have no hasaga whatsoever. The Rebbe is going to now introduce us to another concept, which is essential in the writings of the Rebbe, as expressed in the writings of the Balei Hasidus. V'hinei, Haradla de sha'ashuim ha'atzmiyim megale ha'ein ha'atzmi. Now, this is very much made clear by the Leshem Shabbai V'Achaloima in Sefer HaKlalim, as well as in Sefer Hadeya, And it's also made abundantly clear in the writings of the Rashash and his Talmidim, al pi klale ha'erchin, based on that klal of spiritual relativism, which is the recognition that any level that we see expressed anywhere are levels that can be found everywhere. It just means that those levels need to be understood in accordance with the halachos and the laws and the reality that dictates that level. So just like we have in our lower world 5 partsufim, 5 worlds, 10 spheros, so too in the upper worlds we have those 5 partsufim, 5 worlds, and 5 spheros. But the only distinction is going to be in terms of their coagulation and their manifestation in terms of physicality. So down here we can look at the concept of keser and say that it's something that I can grab hold of and have access to. Up there we still talk about the same term. It's the same term of keser, but it's in relationship to the status of that space that we're talking about. Because what we see down here is going to be true on each and every level. The only distinction is going to be the relative orientation that we have towards how we judge and experience that level. This is what the klal ha'erchen is. It is the secret of spiritual relativism, which means that everything is everywhere. It's all the same. And ultimately, the only distinction is not in terms of the content, but the context in which we view the content. That it's the same all the way up and all the way down. The only thing that shifts is the level of our spiritual experience of those things. So what the Rebbe is saying here is that just like we have an idea of 5 worlds and 5 partsufim and 5 elements of the neshama, the highest of which is Reisha D'Lois Yada, that point of unknowability, that point where we don't know anything whatsoever, that gar of Atik, the highest level of our spiritual awareness. It means that those gradations are also found at the level of Sha'ashuim Ha'atzmiyim. Now, Sha'ashuim Ha'atzmiyim, the essential movement back and forth, that inner movement back and forth, that frictionality that is born out of something moving to and fro prior to any duality or distinction, but rather an inner movement that emerges in and of itself, minei ubei. Those sha'ashuim ha'atzmiyim are typically described in the writings of the students of Mahari Sarug, the Kabbalah of Olam HaMalbush. But what it means over here is that the Rebbe is saying that even on the level of sha'ashuim, on that level, on the highest level, prior to any expression outwards, there's also going to be a level of radla, of atik, of arich, of abba, of ima, of zeranpin, of nukva, of all of the partsufim. So the Rebbe is saying at the highest point, at the radla of the sha'ashuim ha'atzmiyim, at the highest point of unknowability that takes place within, so to speak, that inner mineu bay, that in and of itself that takes place prior to the emergence of the world, within the recesses of infinitude itself, shehu megala ha'ein ha'atzmi, that inner friction, that back and forth process of, so to speak, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's desire to create something other than himself prior to the creation of the world, prior to the tzimtzum, the origination of the friction, of the movement, of the distinction prior to distinction, the birthplace of distinction, the emergence of the possibility of difference prior to there being any actual concept of difference. This is the inner movement, the unconscious drives that precede and give birth to the tzimtzum. That this inner movement, that hine haradla de sha'ashuim ha'atzmiyim, that emergence of movement that gives birth to the possibility of something emerging outwards, hu megala ha'ein ha'atzmi, that is there to reveal the absolute highest, most essential level of nothingness, absolute nothingness. That darga that we're talking about in terms of ki'ilu lo yatsa klal, as if nothing has ever moved outwards. Hinehu megala ha'inyan shekaime yisparach ein klal shum mitzias v'shum yitzia klal. What that teaches us is that from the perspective of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there is absolutely no existence. And not only is there no existence, but there was never any emergence. There was never any movement out of that essential unity. U'machadesh kan ha'magen avos, and what the Magen Avos is revealing to us here is that this darga of ki'ilu lo yatsa klal, as if nothing has ever happened, is medaber l'mala me'hamadrega shel ein od. This is talking about a darga higher than what we typically refer to as ein od, which is the darga of kuma kaima kilo chashive, as if everything doesn't exist. That chaf implies kilo chashive. It's not that it never existed, it's as if it doesn't exist. What the Magen Avos is telling us is this darga of ki'ilu lo yatsa klal, as if it never emerged, that's even higher than the darga of ein od, which we said already we typically don't speak about because that's above the machshava sabriya. Shebedarach klal, says the Rebbe, generally speaking, zehu tachlis hamadrega hachi elyona shel yichud shemedabrim bo. Generally speaking, we only talk up to the level of ein od. But over here, we see that the Magen Avos is hinting to the fact that this darga of ki'ilu lo yatsa klal, as if nothing has happened whatsoever, is even higher than the notion that there's nothing other than HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's a higher level of bittul. It's a higher level of recognizing that I am absolutely nothing, and the world is absolutely nothing, and existence is absolutely nothing, but the absolute presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's infinitude without any limitation. V'ha'admor ha'achron Goin Rav Menachem Mendel, the seventh Lubavitcher Rebbe, Sklusi Ganalenu Dayak Bezeh, makes a diuk that Masha Kasav Shalamala Mehamadrega Shal Kuma Kaima Kiloicha Shive Shehu Ba'oischaf. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe also hinted to this level and the fact that there is something above ein od, which is this recognition that there's absolutely nothing whatsoever. Adayin, there's still nothing. We're still within the ultimate yichud. Things have never left the ultimate yichud. All of the problems, all of the concerns, all of the distortion, all of the distinction is not real. It never existed. It's still something that is completely contained within its original status of absolute unity. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe hints to this when he says that typically speaking, we say the highest level is kula kaima kiloi chashiva, as if it doesn't exist. Hamora al kaf hadimyon, which is a chaf hadimyon saying it's as if it doesn't exist, but in truth it exists. Kamo shabir hatzemach tzedek b'derech mitzvosecha and mitzvos achdus Hashem, in the name of the Baal HaTanya, that kula kaima kiloi chashiva implies that it's as if it doesn't exist, but in truth there's a semblance of existence. But what the Lubavitcher Rebbe points out is yesh madrega shel kula kaima loy chashive. It's not kula kaima kiloy chashive, as if it doesn't exist, but there's a darga above that, which is kula kaima loy chashiva, that absolutely nothing registers when it comes to the absolute presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, mamish belicha fadimyon, in an absolute sense, without that imaginative, clarification of the chaf hadimyon, of that as if. And we have again the Lubavitcher Rebbe hinting to this darga of the Magen Avos, which is that no, mamish, there's a darga, there's an access point where it's not just annihilating existence, but rather coming to a point of understanding that there is no existence, which on a certain level may potentially mean that instead of the attempt to be mevatel all of existence, instead of the attempt to negate that which is present, what a person can do is simply be present in all of their presentness, especially in the body, especially in the katnus, because ultimately even that doesn't exist. Even all of Metzius is ke'ilu lo yatsa klal. And the Rebbe continues, and the Rebbe says, Hine hashra'as elikus hanimshach memadrega zu. What does this actually mean for us? What is the drawing down? What is the presence of the infinite in our lives? What is our relationship to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that emerges from this darga that we're talking about, this darga of ki'ilu lo yatsa klal, as if existence never even exited that original unity, so that it's not a question of bittul because there's nothing to be mevatel. There's absolutely nothing which allows me to sit with myself in the presence of what I conceive as my existence and come to a recognition that this too is expressive of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because there is no existence. What is it that this darga means for us? Hu lahargish habitl shamadregazu. What it means to live with this idea is to feel this idea, is to feel the nullification and the surrender and the freedom that emerges with this type of contemplation. Ki be'emes kol hamadrego shemedaber al balatanya. because in truth, all of the levels that the Baal HaTanya spoke about, Hurak ka'asher margishim ha'ashras alikus al yedei habitulim shel hamadregos elu az yeshaychos aleihem. Because in truth, in order to understand what the Baal HaTanya was speaking about, means to feel the presence and the resting of the Shekhinah HaKadosha in our lives through the self-nullification that is associated with these levels. It's not stam devarim ba'alma. It's not stam Kabbalah where we're talking about these levels in an idealized way, but it's mibasari echazeh. That's what the Baal HaTanya was trying to teach us. That's what the Baal HaTanya was Moser Nafsho for. That's what Yat Kislev is all about. That's what we're going to see Hanukkah is all about. That it's only when we feel these feelings, it's only when we experience that darga of ki'ilu lo yatsa klal. What the Rebbe is highlighting here is that this means something for us. As lofty and celestial these ideas mean, they mean something practically in each and every person's life. Without the attempt to translate these ideas into practical experience of bittul, of self-nullification, of ego nullification, of making myself smaller for the sake of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence in this world, to make room for the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to get out of my own way. Without this, we have no relationship, we have no grasp of any of these dargos. And in strong words, the Rebbe is saying that without the attempt to inculcate these experiences into our practical day-to-day experience as Bnei Yisrael in this world, these words are simply words. The Rebbe continues. And again, this was given over on Yat Kislev, which was in preparation to Hanukkah. As we know that Torah Chasidus is ultimately a hakdama to Hanukkah, because Hanukkah is the giloy of the Shechina Lamata Me'asar Klachim, it's the dir b'tachtoinim, Pesach, to be maniach, the nearest Hanukkah b'Pesach. I heard from a close friend of mine, Rav Yeshua Rubinstein, Pesach is Gematria Chasidus, because the secret of Hanukkah is the secret of the Giluy of Chasidus. And the Rebbe is going to explain now how this Hakdama of Yat Kislev, which comes a week before Hanukkah, is expressive of the same idea. V'hine b'Chanukkah, when it comes to Hanukkah, yesh menorah shehu kli, shehu b'bechinas guf. What we see is that there's a menorah, which is the element of a physical body. It's the vessel that contains light. It's the essence of that which is typically considered lower. V'shoira al zeh ha'or shel hashalhevet shuor ein sof. And what we see is that it's specifically within the kli of the menorah, within the guf, within the body, within the katnus, that is the guf of the menorah. It's specifically there that the light of the flame rests, that the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu rests. And it's exactly what we mean when we said that in the future, Shaha'or Ein Sof, Lo Yihiyeh Stira L'Guf. The presence of our body, the presence of physicality, our experience of katnus, our smallness, our experience with matat, our experience of tzimtzum is not going to be in contradiction to the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because like we said, it's ki'ilu lo yatsa klal. And therefore, if it's as if it was never created, then all of creation is nothing but the expression of that which has not yet been created, which is the infinite. The adarabba, and even more so, not only will the lower aspect of our body, which is associated with the guf, the kli of the menorah, not going to be a stira or a contradiction to the light, but the guf itself, which is the vessel, yegale yoiser seyichad elyon. Not only it won't be in contradiction, but it will reveal that yichud biyeser se'esu, biyeser oz. It's going to teach us that in aruch lecha, no matter how high you climb on the rungs of the ladders of spirituality, what we're ultimately going to come to recognize is kula kaima lo chashiva, ki'ilu lo yatsa klal. I have no idea about anything. I don't know anything whatsoever. It's going to teach us that in aruch, the body is consistently and constantly going to teach us the ultimate nothingness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu on the highest possible level. V'hinei soid haguf de la'asid, and the secret of the body in the future, it will reveal that aspect of ki'ilu lo yatsa klal. That darga that the Magen Avos points out is above the darga of Einod. V'chol elu heim devarim amukim. And all of these matters are deep ideas. The Rebbe continues and he follows. He says, V'ikr lefi hapshat. And what this means on a practical level. shetzarich kilyoin lahaor shel kol haTorah kula lishma. That an individual needs to cultivate within themselves a deep yearning desire to grasp the entirety of the Torah lishma, for the sake of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not for egocentric purposes, not for my own self-development, not for my own self-aggrandizement, but rather to grab hold of the entirety of the Torah, which, as the Rebbe teaches us over and over in the name of the tzaddikim, as Rav Yitzchak Meir Morgenstern Shlita teaches us in the name of the tzaddikim over and over, that Kol HaTorah Kula Ha'inyan Achas, the entirety of the Torah is one thing, and it's coming to teach us the secret of bittul, that what it means to operate with the bittul, the self-nullification on the darga of ki'ilu lo yatsa klal, of efes zulaso, of what the Lubavitcher Rebbe referred to not as kula kaima kiloi chashiva, but the darga higher than it, which is kula kaima loy chashiva, not as if it doesn't exist, but mamish that it doesn't exist. This is the inyan of Yosef HaTzadik. This is the secret of Yosef HaTzadik, who we saw before was attacked by the brothers specifically because he was trying to be megala, the maila of the guf, that he was masalsel b'tza'aro, and his brothers could not understand how there could be a tzaddik who was operating on the darga of the body. Shezacha legalos psat, remez, soid, and razin derazin. That Yosef HaTzadik was able to reveal the ketainas pasim, which is psat, pshat, and remez, and soid, and razin derazin. Again, what I didn't explain at the beginning of this mimer is that what it seems to me is that the Rebbe was basing this entire mimer on a teaching from the Koshnitzer Magid in Parshas Vayeshev in the name of the Kadmonim, which are doiresh, the pasuk that we studied last night, v'yisnachlu oso lahamiso, ito zakt Rashi, imo dahainu elav. And that's where we understood that what the brothers really wanted to attack was the darga of elav, what's the darga of yud and vav, which is the secret of tzimtzum, which is the maila of the lower level above the higher level. This is what is being attacked. The haraz hachi gadol, and the deepest secret imaginable, who hashraas ha'elikus mehasod hane'elam shakula kaima loy chashiva, and the deepest secret in the world that was trying to be revealed by Yosef HaTzadik, that was being attacked, is the secret of the body, is the secret of ki'ilu lo yatsa klal, is the secret of ein aruch lacha, is the hidden secret of kula kaima loy chashiva, as if it's actually not considered anything at all. Shahakol kikadmisa kamay koydem machshavas habriya, that everything continues to exist as it was prior to the original thought of creation, which ultimately means l'fianiyastaiti, that that which is present is also indicative of that which is not present. That presence and non-presence are both reflective of the ultimate presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because nothing ever left the realm of the infinite, and we're still operating as if we're talking in the womb of prior to the tzimtzum of what's going to happen after the tzimtzum, even though the tzimtzum has not yet or ever taken place. And we can't understand this secret. But it's part of the secrets of Torah. And this is what the body wants to teach us. The body wants to teach us that in its abiding presence, it is still ultimately never removed from the infinitude of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's light, because it has never been expressed externally. It has never manifested at anything other than the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Sheho haguf shel hatzadik. This is what the body of the tzaddik, of all of the tzaddikim, of all of us, of amich kulam tzaddikim, this is what the body wants to reveal. This is the aspect of matat. This is the aspect of that katnus that we spoke about, which is both the smallness as well as our teacher, Shahaya Harebi Shel Moshe Rabbeinu, which was the teacher of Moshe Rabbeinu. Umegala lo hasod shel v'hine nahar boiche. And what the pasuk that the Rebbe started everything with was v'hine nahar boicha, that Basia, Basparo, that Klipas Noga sees the guf of the tzaddik and experiences what it means to see the guf of a tzaddik, which is megale, that darga of ein aruch lacha. And that's the katnus that we experience in our lives. And listen to what the Rebbe says here. V'hine nahar boicha, and the child was crying. Bechia, what does it mean to cry? Zak the Rebbe, and this is a teaching that's brought down explicitly in Likutei Moharan, that bechia, to to cry is Roshei Tevos B'Shimcha Yagilu Kol Hayom, that to you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in your name we have rejoiced all day, that these are tears of bittul, these are tears of Rabbi Akiva, who when he would read Shir HaShirim, the Zohar HaKadosh tells us that tears would spread forth and flow forth from his eyes, that the tears that we experience in this world, which are in truth rooted in the tears of joy in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is ultimately the secret of Hine Bahar Boiche, who goyrem lechuva ilah de le'ela. And when we recognize the tears of our lives, the katness of our lives, and how it's representative of the lostliest level of understanding yichud, this gives birth to a desire for the greatest level of tshuva imaginable. Shelo rak shelo chatu me'olam. Not only have we never fallen away from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or we have never transgressed away from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, ela nichnasim lepshita sayichud kemi shelo yatsa klal, but rather we enter into the pshita sayichud, to the simplicity of that yichud, as if we have never departed from it whatsoever. So we're going to end over here right now, because the next inyan is going to go delving deeper into what the body is, and it's going to be connected to the secret of the Tikkun Klali and the Shir HaMeruba, which we've spoken about. But for now, what we're trying to understand is, again, what does it mean practically to operate on that darga of Ki'ilu Lo Yatsa Klal? And for us, what it means is to learn to recognize in our own bodies, in our own experience, in our own bechia, in our own inability to grab hold of anything, other than the recognition that we can't truly grab hold of anything, is to recognize that if things never actually were created, then in our experiences right now, we can still see ourselves ki'ilu lo yatsa klal, as if we haven't ever left. And at that point, the kalim, the bottom, the body, the smallness, matat, begins to operate as the vessel to reveal this deep level of incomprehensible yichud be'ezras Hashem.